Hi, Karen.
Hi, Caitlin.
Thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. I really, really appreciate it. I think, obviously we've been seeing Ice Bucket Challenge all over social media for the last 2 weeks now. And really, up until that point, ALS is not something we see on our social media. It's not something we see every time we open up CNN's homepage. So, I think though, the awareness has been fantastic. The fundraising has been unbelievable. I do wonder though if the information is as good as it could be, if people are really as familiar, are really educating themselves through this. And so I'm hoping that we can do a little bit of that by talking through your story. So thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
So to begin with, we were just talking about this, but you lost your mother and your grandfather to ALS, and you just told me that you are the 25th in your family tree to have been diagnosed. When did you realize that ALS was something that you might have to deal with in your life personally beyond, your mother and your grandfather?
Right. Well, when my mom was sick, my parents didn't want to point out to us that it was a hereditary form of ALS
Yeah.
because my sisters and I were very young. I have three sisters. So we were 16, 18, 19, and 20 when my mom was finally diagnosed.
Oh.
And we didn't know our grandfather. So it wasn't something that we had lived through prior. We only knew vaguely. They actually thought that he had MS. And then through more discovery, found out that it was ALS. So I think when I got into my 20s, I was in nursing school. I am a nurse, and I was taking classes, obviously, on biology and genetics, and I kind of put all the pieces together at that point, which was very shocking, to figure out that I did have a 50% chance of developing ALS.
50%. Wow. And that's because it's familial ALS, which
Right.
I read is like 10% of all ALS cases are familial.
Right. So they say about 5 to 10% of all ALS is familial. The majority are sporadic ALS, meaning that they don't know why it happens. It's a random occurrence without any other family members getting ALS.
Wow.
So the familial ALS is rare even within the umbrella of ALS.
Okay. So so when you realized that there was a 50-50 chance that you could develop ALS, how'd that change your life? How did it change your plans? I know because you were in like your early 20s when you sort of figured that out?
I was, I think, 21 or 22 when I figured it out. And I was already dating my current husband. So, I kind of at that point made the decision that I didn't think I wanted to have children because I didn't want to take the chance of passing this gene on, which is a really personal decision.
Yeah.
I always say I never had an overwhelming urge to have children. My husband didn't either. So for us, it was a little bit easier of a decision to make. But it gets harder and harder, obviously, as you get older and all of your friends and your family are having children. So it was a decision that we just consciously made throughout our relationship and our marriage. And really, we've just tried to enjoy life, and we've done a lot. We've traveled a lot. We enjoy spending time with our friends and family, first and foremost, and we really just build our life around that. So I always say I don't have any regrets with my life. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything, which is good. I don't know how many people can say that.
It's really nice that you met your husband so young. And you've had really good times together. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there like a constant fear, when you know that there's this chance that you could develop this disease? I think of the things that people get anxiety over, and something like this is, more than most people could imagine. Did you live with a fear until you were diagnosed, or how did you handle that?
Yeah, it was a constant fear. I would be lying if I said it wasn't. And it's, unfortunately still a constant fear for my sisters because they don't have any idea whether they're going to get ALS. Just because I'm the youngest does not mean that their chances are gone. It's still 50-50. But yeah, every time you stumble on something or you trip and fall, or you get muscle twitches or, anything that would at all be the beginnings of ALS, really it just sets it off in your head and you have to convince yourself, I'm just tired. I just exercise too much. My leg is just kind of weak and twitchy because of that. So it's very hard. It's constantly on your mind. And unfortunately for me, it became a reality. I noticed things changing when I was 36 years old with my workouts and things like that. So, on the flip side of things, at least at diagnosis, when you're familial ALS, you already know so much about the disease that, I think the acceptance portion might be a little bit easier to come by, whereas somebody that just gets diagnosed with ALS and doesn't know what ALS is, that's like a really difficult time to understand what the disease is, how to explain it to your friends and family. So in some ways, I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm glad that I knew what I was walking into.
I mean, I don't think it sounds ridiculous. I think it has to be damn near impossible to accept either way, but it does make some sense. Just, I don't know.
Well, my friends and family all know what ALS is.
Yeah.
So when I told them that I was diagnosed, I didn't have to explain what the disease was.
Yeah.
And I had been fundraising for ALS for years through work and everything. So even my coworkers and the people that I have been friends with, and even at past jobs, they all knew what ALS was.
So how did that, when I read a news article about you, it kind of talked about sort of what you just mentioned about having, just feeling little things and thinking like, oh my God, could this be it? What was it, how did you, finally get diagnosed, and what were those words like to hear for you?
Well, I did sit on, when I noticed things were kind of happening with my own body, that I knew something was changing.
Mm-hmm.
I was very, very active prior to being diagnosed with ALS. I used to walk my dogs all the time, and I noticed that my route that I always took when I walked the dogs, it was taking me longer to finish it, and then I noticed that my footsteps started to sound a little bit different on the pavement. So I just really started to pay attention, and then as it progressed on, and that was July of 2010 really when I noticed anything, and then as it progressed further and further, I noticed my balance was getting worse. So then I took yoga, and I thought, well, maybe maybe I'm just getting older. I'm trying to convince myself that it's not what I think it is. But, I would say by Thanksgiving of 2010, I was pretty certain that I had ALS. It was getting harder for me to climb the stairs and things like that. But then it was the holidays, so I just sat on it for a little bit. And then in January, I spoke to my husband about my concerns, and my doctor is actually my husband's cousin. He's an ALS specialist at Lehigh Valley Hospital. So I called Glenn, and he knew that we had this family history. So my diagnosis story is far and above better than anybody else's you'll ever hear. I called Glenn, and the next week I got a visit with him, and by the week after that I was diagnosed. But still hearing the words, your EMG shows, that you are definitely showing signs of ALS. It's still, as much as I know what it still was pretty bad. Yeah. And my husband obviously was with me, and, you think that you can set up in your mind, get yourself ready for it, and in your head what it is, but just hearing it really sucked. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
the whole way out of the hospital, and the whole way home, and then more at home. Yeah.
And then I imagine then too, telling your sisters, telling your father and your family members, it must have been an exhausting time.
It was brutal. We didn't tell anybody for probably almost a month. And one of my best friends we were going to visit, and I did tell her because I wanted to be able to tell her face to face, and we live several hours away. But I waited until I was able to talk to my dad first, and then my sisters, before I really told anybody else, because it's obviously, it's a disease that affects me, and obviously my husband changes that whole relationship, but it just brings ALS right back into the forefront of everybody's lives.
Yeah.
Which is tough.
So how have your symptoms progressed? Has it been 2.5 years? Is that right? 3.5 years. I'm sorry. So how you were working as a nurse at the time? How did your symptoms progress? Are you still working? Can you tell me about some of those things?
Sure.
And actually, if you would, for people who don't know, how does ALS typically affect a person? Just a little bit of that background too, if you would.
Okay, so first with ALS presentation, it can present differently with different people. So the two main ways of presentation are either a bulbar presentation, which typically affects speech and swallowing first, and maybe some more respiratory problems. And then there's limb presentation, which could be arms or legs. Typically, it starts on one side. Like for me, it was my right leg that I start to notice issues with first, and then my left leg start to have issues several months later. As far as balance and strength and seeing some atrophy and things like that. But even with the type of presentation you have, there's differences between all patients. Yeah. And even between my mom and I, who have the same genetic mutation, we present differently. So there really isn't, there's no checklist like, oh yeah, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. I say all the time, although I know what ALS is and I know what to expect for the most part, it likes to throw me a couple little surprises just to keep me on my toes. But so for me, it was my right leg that started to weaken first. And I am right-handed, so I'm dominant on my right side. And I just, like I said, noticed that my balance was off. And I had been working I worked as a pre-op and recovery room nurse for an outpatient surgical center. Prior to that, I was a labor and delivery nurse at Abington Hospital, and then I went to the surgical center. So I've always been extremely active at work, too. But I started to not trust myself as much with the patients. And my joke was, you have these fall risk assessments that you do on your patients when they come in. And when your fall risk is higher than theirs, it's probably a good time to stop taking care of patients. But in all seriousness, I was afraid that if a patient needed me to hold them up, that we would both fall and both get injured, which is, out of responsibility to myself and to them. I really had to stop doing any hands-on nursing that required any lifting. But my employers were fantastic, and they really let me cater as I progressed further and further. They just kind of molded a job for me. And whatever changes, whenever I couldn't do something anymore, they either implemented something to help me, or they just said, okay, well, you can't do that anymore, but you can still do X, Y, and Z. So, I'm so thankful that I was able to work for people like that respected, I still had the brain of a nurse.
Yeah.
So I could still work as a nurse. But once I went from obviously no walking assistance to a cane and then to a walker. And once my shoulders start to get weaker, I was having trouble pulling charts down and things like that. And I wasn't driving anymore. I lost my driving abilities in October of 2012. So that means someone had to drive me into work and someone had to pick me up from work. And that's hard. You're dependent. My husband usually drove me in, and then various family members and friends would drive me home. We'd have dinner together and everything. But it's hard to be dependent. Yeah. And it's hard to get up and, when it used to take me 45 minutes to get ready for work, it's now an hour and a half. And to be in work by 7:30, it really just took a toll on me. So I stopped working, stopped getting paid to work, and now I volunteer. I volunteer at the ALS Association. So I'm really involved with the chapter. I joined the Board of Trustees, and I am chairing the Patient and Family Services Committee at this point. So it keeps me really involved, which is great.
So, and you are in a wheelchair now.
I am. I can still stand. I can still stand, and I can, if I'm standing at the counter, I can maneuver a little bit around, or if I'm holding on to somebody, I can do a couple of steps. But because my hips are so weak, my stability is really shot. So if I'm home alone, I will only stand if my wheelchair is behind me and, say, the counter is in front of me. But, I spend the majority of my day sitting in a wheelchair.
So you said you were involved with ALS organizations before you were diagnosed, and now that you aren't working and perhaps have a little more free time, you've really, dove into that. What kind of, satisfaction does that give you? It must be obviously fulfilling work for you.
It is. My dad actually has been crazy involved with the ALS Association, even more so than my sisters and I, since my mom's death. He was the treasurer of the Philadelphia chapter for 15 years, and he's been on the board for, I think, 20 years now. So he has always stayed extremely involved. And we've always participated in all the fundraisers, the walks, and the bike ride. So we've known a lot of the people that work at the chapter. So, in again, in many ways, starting to do more of the chapter was nice that I had the time to do that, and it was nice to be able to work more closely with all these people that you meet on random occasions, as in the events. But they're just such a wonderful network of people that work there, and they're so committed. And they always say, "We want to be unemployed, like find a cure. I'll go find another job."
Yeah.
But it is. I get to use my nursing knowledge still, which is nice. And just to be a part, someone once said decisions about ALS patients shouldn't be made without an ALS patient's opinion.
Yeah.
And I do think that's true.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't make decisions about what you're going to do for me, or obviously me being ALS patients as a whole, without asking me what I think about it. So I think it's great. The chapter is wonderful about including the opinions of patients. Obviously, not just mine. There's several patients that are very highly involved in the chapter.
What has that been like for you to be able to spend time with other people who are currently, dealing with ALS?
Yeah, it's great. We've made a lot of really good friends. And, thankfully Bob can talk to their spouses too. So it is really nice from that level. No one really knows what you're going through unless they're going through the same thing. But most of the patients that I spend my time with, or I've even met on Facebook, have been very positive. They work towards advocacy. They're interested in raising money, for research. I try to surround myself with people who are more positive versus more negative, because I don't need negativity in my life right now. But it's great. I mean, Facebook has really changed things dramatically. I have friends from Wisconsin and California that I talk to, and we make, comments about each other's families and things. It's really nice.
Yeah, I wondered, you just mentioned this the positivity factor, and, if you were negative or whatever, no one could blame you for that. How do you stay positive? I mean, is it a choice every day to find positivity?
No.
You just get drunk?
Drunk. No, it is a choice.
Hey, no one could blame you.
Yes. What I said to my dad initially when I was still accepting the diagnosis and telling everybody, I jokingly just would say, fake it till you believe it. Like, I just can't go through, these months being so incredibly stressed out without finding some joy somewhere.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, we were like, okay, we are not watching any sad movies. We will only watch comedies. We've got enough crap going on in our lives. We kind of just need something light. And I've always been, it's ridiculous. I've always been a glass half full kind of gal. And I really pull strength from other people, even as a nurse. I loved helping people. I loved when I made a difference for them. So if I can make a difference for another ALS patient, I try to figure out how I can still be helpful to other people. And, I have my moments just like everybody else, but I really do focus on trying to just be grateful for what I have in my life. And that just carries me through for right now.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you were really active before, walking your dog's a runner and those things. What do you, find pleasure in now? What do you do to,
well, I don't get a lot of time alone anymore because I do need more help. Thankfully, I do enjoy my friends and family very much. So even if it's just sitting around and talking, I love to read. Thankfully, I love TV and reality shows that got me through the winter time because I couldn't get out of my house.
Yeah.
I think I binge watched 7 series of television shows, but and sometimes I'm content to just sit and relax.
Yeah, good.
Have dogs, so just to hang out with my dogs and just appreciate that I'm sitting outside on my deck and enjoying the weather, whether it's in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and just sometimes it's just nice to sit and just relax, and I enjoy that too.
Yeah,
I don't always have to be doing something.
Yeah.
There's still a lot that I do as an ALS patient. I'm always somewhat shocked myself at the number of things that people are like, come on, let's go do it. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll try it. So, I have a lot of adventurous people around me that are just like, oh, suck it up. Come on, let's go out and try it. So, no one's letting me sit still for too long, that's for sure.
And it sounds like you've got a lot of really strong people around you, and there's not like a pity party going on.
No, 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 no. There's no pity party here.
Yeah, but that's got to be really helpful, really. I would think.
We always joke, there's no pity party here. Like, yes, it sucks. We shed our tears every once in a while, but then you just put on your big girl panties and carry on. But no, I think the fact that so many of my friends are in the medical field, nurses and doctors, and I do think it helps because they're used to dealing with sicknesses or somebody that might need help. I don't think it's as awkward of a relationship for them as it might be for someone who hasn't seen me for 6 months, and when they do come and see me, the differences in my physical abilities are a lot more apparent to them than they are to people that are like, all right, so what? So you need help getting dressed now. Okay. They just walk in and they don't care that I'm sitting there naked in front of them. So there is, I think I have a lot of friends and family members that just make it a lot easier for me. There's not much awkwardness.
Yeah. It really thickens those bonds too, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Everybody and their brothers see me naked at this point, so I might as well just take off my clothes and ride up down the street at this point. So.
Well, you are on camera.
I
know. So the ice bucket challenge. I mean, that's someone had posted, a friend, my cousin, who's friends with your best friend. I mean, that's the way it goes on Facebook. Posted your story, and I read it and said I need to talk to her if she's willing. But that came about because of the ice bucket challenge. And it's everywhere. It does seem like it's starting to fall off a little bit, but my goodness, I think the last time I checked, it was like $40 million. I'll update, the post with the 53 million.
53 million now.
And that's compared to some very small number this time last year.
1.2 million.
Yeah. What does that mean to you? I mean, what has this been like, seeing everyone talking about ALS?
There's so many things that are amazing about it. For one, that people are talking about ALS, and hopefully, even if a small percentage of those people that don't know what ALS is, if they look it up and learn about ALS, then maybe someone that they talk to, they can explain the basics of what ALS is. Because sometimes people will say, oh, why are you in a wheelchair? Oh, I have ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, and they just kind of, I hope you get better. Well, I'm not going to get better, but you're not going to say that to somebody, and you just say, oh, thank you, and roll along. But, it's a disease that I'm so happy that now it's getting national attention. And I think the majority of people that are involved with the Ice Bucket Challenge probably do know that it's a fatal disease. Nobody survives ALS. And it has no boundaries. It is non-discriminate. It will attack men and women, young and old. So, hopefully those are the things that are getting across to people. And the fact that there's no treatment and there's no cure for this disease. So, just the media attention alone for that. And then the amount of money raised, it's just crazy. The amount of research funding that they will be able to do for this disease is, I think they just approved, it's under $4 million in grants this year. I want to say it was even $2.5 million through the ALS Association. So obviously they're not going to spend $50 million in one shot. They can't. But, just the simple fact that you have so many of these great scientists trying to figure out what's causing ALS, and there's just not a lot of funding. Our numbers are too small for big drug companies to care. It sounds horrible, but we're a small population. We're not profitable. So big pharma is not interested in helping find a cure or a treatment. So this bulk of donations that have come in is amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I think
it's a big step.
With ALS, what ALS is so scary that it's hard to talk about, which again, is why I do appreciate you talking so candidly. And so, really, with Vital Chatter, what we try to do is talk about the things that are sometimes really hard to talk about. So I'm happy to have this platform to be able to share this. I'm wondering maybe what's one thing you'd want people to understand about ALS, what it is, or how it affects people.
What is one thing? Oh, one.
You can share more than one if you've got more than one.
I said it earlier that ALS is not just affecting the patient. It's affecting their whole family and their friends. Eventually you become so incapacitated you can't do anything for yourself. You can't feed yourself. You can't dress yourself. You can't bathe yourself. So all the things that we all take for granted doing every single day of our lives, myself included before this happened to me, all of that gets taken away from you. Even something as simple as losing your driver's license and not being able to drive yourself anywhere, that independence, it's crushing. And then on top of that, the emotional toll the disease takes, it's exhausting. And it's hard that nobody knows what ALS is. It's very difficult when you go places and they're like, oh, okay. And you feel like screaming, no, it's not okay.
Yeah.
I have family that I am worried about, and I'm doing everything I can. I'm participating in trials and studies, and I'm trying desperately to find a cure, not for myself, but for my sisters, if they need it. Hopefully they don't. But, there's not a day that goes by that doesn't cross my mind.
Yeah.
So
I think that's probably all the questions I have for you. Is there anything that you want to add? Anything you think people should know? Anything you want to share with everyone who's been doing these ice bucket challenges and are learning about ALS maybe for the first time?
Right. Well, for anyone that's doing the ice bucket challenge, I think it's great. I want to say thank you. It's overwhelmingly crazy to me that millions of people are dumping ice over their head and saying ALS when they do it, and friends of friends and friends. It's my news feed is filled with them, and they make me laugh and they make me smile. And if people are donating, also even better. Pete Frady's one of the patients who started this ice bucket challenge to raise awareness. I can't say thank you enough to that gentleman and his family and his friends. I've never met him, but hopefully I will someday. But no, I just think, let's keep ALS out there. Let's not forget about what ALS is and what it does to patients like myself when the ice buckets stop coming. And, we're still living with ALS and hopefully living very well with ALS.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.